For more than 100 years, baseball has been played by the young and old. The playing fields have been as elaborate as today's modern major league ballparks, and as simple as a country pasture or a city street. The unifying factor of all of these experiences is the baseball diamond. And yet, the locations that these fields are placed also contributes to a uniqueness that none of the other major league sports can match. This series will explore these fields of dreams and how they contributed to the lore of the game. Philadelphia is the cradle of American independence and home to the Liberty Bell and cultural icons like the Philadelphia Philharmonic and the Franklin Institute. But it is also home to such Americana as the Mummers Parade, Philly cheesesteaks, and soft pretzels. Not surprising, it is also a hotbed of sports fanatics. The sheer volume of heartbreak these fans have suffered over the years could fill volumes reaching all the way back to the birth of baseball as an organized pastime. Prior to the American Civil War, there were three variants of baseball: the Massachusetts game, Knickerbocker rules, and Philadelphia's own town ball. Ultimately, Knickerbocker rules, or the New York game, took precedence as it was the first to become truly organized, beginning in 1857 with the organization of the National Association of Baseball Players in New York City. And then it spread throughout the East Coast as Union soldiers introduced the New York game to men from other parts of the North during the Civil War. By the time the Civil War ended in 1865, the National Association had member clubs throughout the Northeast. In Philadelphia, as the 1867 season was about to begin, there were 6 clubs competing within the National Association, and preeminent amongst them was the Philadelphia Athletic Club. While clubs like the Olympics and the Mercantile formed earlier, it was the Athletic Club that was the most aggressive of the group. All of these clubs originally reflected the club title. They were social groups that organized around playing the game. But the Philadelphia Athletic Club actively sought out the best players in the city, and sometimes they paid them for their efforts. The Athletic Club played their games at a field located at 15th Street and Columbia Avenue, a road known today as Cecil B. Moore Avenue. And after the Civil War, the club proved highly successful, led by the likes of Al Reach and Lip Pike, both paid professionals in an otherwise amateur sport. But while they won the league pennant once and finished second 4 times, they could never win a championship match during their time with the National Association. In the last 2 years of the original National Association, the game was overshadowed by the success of the Cincinnati Red Stockings, who were undefeated in 1869 and lost only 6 of 74 games in 1870, employing an all-professional team. In 1871, in recognition of the growing influence of paid players in the game, the association split into separate amateur and professional circuits. The Athletic Club joined the professional circuit and shifted to playing at the Jefferson Street grounds. The first thing they did was tear down the old wooden grandstands and build a pair of tiered pavilions. They put in bleacher benches that extended down the outfield lines, resulting in a ballpark that could sit 5,000 fans. The outfield had no walls, so games could be interrupted by animals wandering onto the field. They inaugurated their new park by winning the initial pennant of the new league. Led by pitcher and manager Dick McBride and Al Reach and Levi Meyerly, the Athletics dominated everyone except the Boston Red Stockings led by George Wright. In 1872, they were still successful in an expanded 11-team circuit, but they finished fourth, 7.5 games behind Wright's Boston club. In 1873, they shared their ballpark with the Philadelphia Whites, who finished ahead of the Athletics in second place, 4 games behind the champion Red Stockings, while the Athletics finished fifth. The two teams continued to share the ballpark, and it was here that the first no-hitter by a professional baseball team was recorded. On July 28, 1875, somewhere between 500 and 600 people watched Joe Josephs of the Philadelphia Whites no-hit the Chicago White Stockings 4-0. The Chicago club was only able to reach base 4 times on errors. By 1875, the Athletics and the Whites were joined by a third club, the Centennials, who played their games at Centennial Grounds. Centennial Grounds had been used for baseball since 1860. Initially called Columbia Park, the Centennials resodded the field and built a clubhouse and grandstands that could reportedly seat 6,500 fans. Located at Columbia Avenue and 25th Street, the park was located next to a trolley terminal, allowing players and fans to ride the horse-drawn cars from Center City. But the baseball dollar could only be stretched so far, and the Centennials folded after only 14 games. But that would not be the end of their ballpark. The National Association was a loosely organized circuit, with clubs folding before a season concludes or failing to make road trips due to financial issues. There were also issues with player rowdiness and gambling on the games they played. As a result, William Hulbert, a Chicago businessman and an officer of the Chicago White Stockings, persuaded 7 other National Association teams, St. Louis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Boston, Hartford, New York, and Philadelphia, to leave the National Association and join his White Stockings in creating the National League. By now, these teams were clubs in name only. All of them were controlled by owners who hired players to perform. The inaugural game of the new league took place in Philadelphia's Jefferson Street grounds. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported that about 3,000 persons assembled upon the grounds at 25th and Jefferson Streets to witness the first championship game of baseball between the Boston and Athletic clubs. The game was won by the Boston Redlegs 6-5, particularly due to poor fielding of the Athletics. Despite the hitting of George Hall, who led the league with 5 home runs and a .384 batting average, the Athletics struggled on the field and financially. On September 11th, they informed the league they would not make a final Western road trip due to lack of funds. The team had a record of 14 wins and 45 losses. 5 days later, the New York Mutuals made the same decision. At the league's winter meetings, both the Mutuals and the Athletics were expelled from the league for failure to complete their required schedule. Professional baseball would not return to Philadelphia for another 6 years. In 1882, based on the success of the National League, another new professional circuit was organized. The American Association fielded 6 teams in its initial season, one of whom was a new Philadelphia Athletics club. The first year, they played their games at Oakdale Park, which had been in use since the 1860s for amateur baseball. Located at the corner of 11th Street and Cumberland, the new Athletics tore down the existing ballpark and built a new wooden grandstand to seat 2,000 fans, and outfield bleachers to seat another 2,000 fans. But even the 4,000 seats were insufficient for fans that wanted to watch professional baseball. So after the 1882 season, they moved to the Jefferson Street ball field for the 1883 season. The same year, the National League returned to Philadelphia when it awarded a franchise to Al Reach, a star of the old Philadelphia Athletics of the National Association. This team still performs today as the Phillies. They resurrected the Centennial's old ballpark and renamed it Recreation Park. Unfortunately, that first year provided an omen of what was in store for their fans. They finished last, winning only 17 of 98 games, with a winning percentage of .173, the worst in a long string of futility for the club. They finished 46 games out of first place and 23 games behind the 7th place Detroit Wolverines. Their best hitter was their catcher, Emil Gross, who batted .307 with 1 home run. Their starting pitcher, John Coleman, finished with a record of 12 wins and 48 losses and an ERA of 4.87. Meanwhile, at Jefferson Street grounds, the AA Athletics took the league's title, winning 66 of 98 games. As the Phillies and Athletics geared up to compete for fans in 1884, a third league, the Union Association, joined the fray and placed a team in Philadelphia. The Keystones quickly erected a park at the corner of Broad and Moore Streets in South Philadelphia, the former home of the Four Paw Circus. This was the only time a ball club ventured into South Philadelphia until Veterans Stadium opened in 1971. But the Union Association suffered from a lack of competitive balance, as Henry Lucas, the league founder and owner of the St. Louis Maroons, stacked the best players on his club. The Keystones faltered from the start, and when they folded in August, they were next to last with only 22 wins. The only notable player on the team was Jack Clements, the only person to play his entire career as a left-handed catcher. The Phillies and the Athletics fared little better that season, finishing 6th and 7th in their respective circuits. The Union Association lasted only 1 year, and it was once again only the Athletics and the Phillies competing for the Philadelphia sports fans. There was one last challenge made to the National League and the American Association. In 1890, the Players' League took on the two established circuits and their iron grip on player movement. Included in the circuit was a team in Philadelphia named the Quakers. The league was created by the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players, an early attempt to unionize the players. Led by John Montgomery Ward, both a player and a law school graduate, the union tried to negotiate with the owners to alter the standard baseball contract with a threat to form a new league. The owners called their bluff, and the Players' League took the field for the 1890 season, with 8 teams and many well-known players plucked from the established leagues, including future Philadelphia stars Ed Delahanty and Connie Mack. The Quakers built a ballpark at Broad and Dolphin Streets in North Philadelphia called Four Paw Park, only 2 blocks south of the Phillies' new home at Broad and Lehigh. Four Paw Park, like all others of its time, conformed to the city block it was built upon. As a result, it has deep right and center field walls measuring 385 feet and 450 feet from home respectively, and a shallower left field porch of 345 feet. Opening day at Four Paw Park saw more than 17,000 fans fill the new grounds. The field was still being sodded as the first fans began taking their seats, because it had hosted the Four-Paw Circus only 24 hours earlier. All three Philadelphia teams competed for fans on 19 occasions, with the Phillies and Quakers going head-to-head 37 times. The Philadelphia Athletics fared the worst. The team was carrying more than $9,000 in debt and were being courted by the owners of the Quakers. At the beginning of September, the players threatened to strike to earn 6 weeks of unpaid salary. And by September 16th, the team could still not make payroll and released or sold all of their players. They finished the season with a pickup team, losing their last 21 games, including their last 5 games at home. For their actions, the AA expelled them from the circuit, and when the Players League folded at the end of the season, the Quakers franchise was taken into the AA. It was the end of the line for professional baseball at Jefferson Street grounds. The Quakers continued to play at Ballpark Park in 1891. Jefferson Street grounds had been in use since 1864 and witnessed the first organized professional baseball game in 1871. Part of its location still features sandlot baseball diamonds. By then, though, the AA itself was on its last legs, and the circuit folded at the end of the 1891 season, with 4 of its clubs joining the National League, but not the Athletics. Philadelphia, for now, belonged to the Phillies. After stumbling the first 2 seasons after being admitted into the National League in 1883, the Phillies started putting together respectable seasons, and by the time the AA folded after 1891, they had put together a club that consistently finished in the upper division. This success was reflected in attendance, which had tripled in the first 4 years of operation. So by 1886, team owners Al Reach and John Rogers decided they needed a new park to replace Recreation Field. The site they chose was a rectangular city block at the northwest corner of Huntington Avenue and North Broad Street. It was here they built the Philadelphia baseball grounds. Due to the dimensions of the property they purchased, the left field wall was 500 feet from home plate, a distance never surmounted by a home run ball, while the right field fence was a mere 310 feet. Beyond the right and center field walls ran Pennsylvania Railroad tracks. It had a covered pavilion behind home plate and grandstands that extended down the first and third base lines. Like all ballparks of the time, it was built out of wood and could seat 12,500. Their continued on-field success, led by hard-hitting Ed Delahanty, Nap Lajoie, and Elmer Flick, ensured the park's turnstile continued to turn and the club consistently had the highest attendance records, leading the league 6 times from 1890 to 1899. But the ground on which Reach and Rogers built their ballpark seemed to be cursed. On the morning of August 6, 1894, a fire broke out at the ballpark as the Phillies prepared for a doubleheader with the Baltimore Orioles. The ensuing conflagration not only burnt the Phillies field to the ground, but several adjacent businesses as well. It was the first of several unfortunate incidents to befall the Phillies at this location. After a short road trip, the Phillies returned home to play 2 series at the University of Pennsylvania's old athletic field at 37th Street and Spruce Avenue. They had considered old Four-Paw Park, but it was in too much of disarray. Traveling to the old athletic field was difficult, and Phillies fans were happy when National League Park reopened on August 18th. The Sporting Life wrote, upon its reopening, "The Phillies reopened their park last Saturday. The bleachers are finished, and with the exception of being uncovered, are more commodious than the old bleachers, while the seating capacity has been enlarged. The grandstand, however, even at this writing is not finished, owing to the substantial manner in which it is being constructed. Everything is being put up to stay, and when completed, the Philadelphia Club will have a stand just as substantial, although not quite so ornamental, as the one burned. No attempt will be made to roof over the pavilion just at present for 14 games to the end of the baseball season in this city. A canvas awning will be put up as a temporary protection from sun and weather. When the season ended, Reach and Rogers wasted no time and began construction of an all-new ballpark, one built mostly of brick and steel, although wood was used for some frames. Unique in design, it was the first to employ cantilevered double-decked stands so that there was no obstructed view seats. It also featured a hill in center field that covered a Pennsylvania Railroad tunnel, created to expand the ballpark. It was reported that center fielders could feel the rumbling of trains passing underneath them. Bleacher seats extended all of the way down the outfield lines. The facility could seat 18,000 fans. It was the new crown jewel of National League parks, and it would be the last of the 19th century Major League parks in use when it finally closed its doors in 1938. For the rest of the 19th century, the Phillies would consistently be at or near the top in attendance thanks to a competitive team. Yet there were storm clouds on the horizon. In 1901, another challenge to National League dominance was launched. Led by Dan Johnson and Charles Kaminsky, the American League began play with teams in several cities abandoned by the National League a year earlier, as well as competing head-to-head with them in the cities of Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia. The AL began raiding NL rosters, and in the first 2 years the Phillies were hard hit, losing 9 players to the new league, including future Hall of Famers Delahanty, Lajoie, and Flick. Dan Johnson recruited former NL player and manager Connie Mack to spearhead the Philadelphia AL franchise as manager and part owner. Mack in turn convinced Phillies part owner Ben Shibe to buy 50% of the new club. The first order of business for the new owners was to find a place to play. They obtained a 10-year lease on a block of ground bordered by 29th Street, Oxford Street, 30th Street, and Columbia Avenue in the Brewerytown section of the city. The plot was small, only 4.2 acres, resulting in short distances of 340 feet to left field and 280 feet to the right field corner. Straightaway center was 395 feet from home plate, but the deepest point on the field was to the left of center at 440 feet. On that site, they built a 9,500-seat park for a cost of $35,000. They opened their park on April 26th as 10,524 fans, many standing around the outfield walls, watched as they lost their inaugural game to the Washington Senators 5-1. The Phillies were also playing at home that day, losing to the Boston Bean Eaters 4-3. It was their 4th home game of the season and attendance was poor. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported, "Because of the counter-attraction, the American League opening, the attendance was not all that it should be and not at all flattering to the players and managers. The official figures placed the number of spectators at 779. That number of people looked like a mere handful on the Colonel's big cantilever. A week earlier, they drew approximately 4,500 fans for their home opener." Over the season, the the Phillies outdrew the upstart Athletics by less than 30,000 fans that first year, while finishing second. Meanwhile, the Athletics finished fourth in their inaugural season. 1902 saw a huge turnaround. The Phillies, having their best players jump to the AL, fell to 7th place, while the Athletics won the second AL pennant. More importantly, they outdrew the Phillies by a 2-1 margin. The early years were extremely beneficial to the Athletics, as they won 2 pennants and finished second twice during the 8 years they occupied Columbia Park. For the Phillies, it was a different story, as they followed their 1902 7th place finish, with 7th and 8th place finishes in 1903 and 1904. And the Athletics continued to outdraw them by large numbers, even though the Phillies had the larger park. Another tenant of Columbia Park were the Philadelphia Giants of the Eastern Colored League. The Giants were organized in 1902 by H. Walter Schlichter, longtime Negro League player Sol White, and sports editor Harry Smith. From 1902 until 1908, they dominated the league, winning championships from 1904 until 1907. The team was led by future Hall of Famers Rube Foster and Pete Hill. But a falling out between White and Schlichter in 1909 marked the beginning of the end of the team, and in 1911 the team disbanded. Insult was added to injury to the Phillies' fortunes when catastrophe again struck their ballpark in 1903. During the second game of a doubleheader with the Boston Nationals on August 8th, a disturbance on 15th Street precipitated a rush by left field bleacher fans to a balcony at the top of the wooden stands to watch. A group of girls had been teasing 2 drunk men staggering on the street when one of the men turned on the girls, grabbing one by the hair. He lost his balance and fell on her, eliciting screams by both the girl underneath him and her friends. The cries caused many of the fans in the left field bleachers to climb up to a balcony that extended over top the street by 3 feet. The added stress on that structure caused it to collapse. Policeman Charles Mushert, who had been patrolling the bleachers, said, "The first thing I knew, the balcony was full of people, each trying to peer down in the street below. Those below were crowding them on. The officers of the ballpark were shouting to them to go back, but could scarcely make themselves heard. I felt the balcony trembling beneath me and threw my weight the other way and forced those around me to do the same thing, but it was too late. The balcony literally tore itself loose for 100 feet and dropped to the ground, carrying the people with it. I never saw such a sight." All told, 22 people died and nearly 200 were hurt from the balcony collapse. The necessity to rebuild forced the Phillies to lease the use of the Athletics Columbia Park for 16 games while the bleachers were repaired. The success enjoyed by the Athletics drove Mack and Shibe to seek a bigger ballpark. They settled on a piece of land on Lehigh Avenue between 20th and 21st Streets, just 5 blocks west of the Phillies' home. Rich Westcott, in his book Philadelphia's Old Ballparks, noted that the location was in an area that was a virtual wilderness, with mostly vacant lots and woods. Shibe and Mack even admitted they were taking a huge gamble, he wrote. "We wondered if we would ever fill those long rows of seats," Mack said years later. Shibe and Mack did not want just any ballpark. They hired the firm of William Steele and Sons to build it. The firm had already built the city's first steel and concrete skyscraper. It was the first steel and concrete ballpark with a double-decked grandstand that ran from first base around to third base. Additional bleacher seats extended down the foul lines to the outfield wall. When it opened on April 12th, it could seat 20,000 fans, expanding to 23,000 by June of its initial season, and 27,000 by 1913. In contrast, the Phillies ballpark could only seat 18,000 fans. It was reported that for the opening game, more than 30,000 fans jammed into the new park, and many more were turned away. The Philadelphia Public Ledger called it a palace for the fans, the most beautiful and capacious baseball structure in the world. The Evening Telegraph wrote, "The Philadelphia American League Club believed that those who lived by the sweat of their brow should have as good a chance of seeing the game as the man who never had to roll up his sleeves to earn a dollar. They therefore built for the masses as well as the classes, and Shibe Park had more room for the poor man than for the rich one. This is as it should be, for baseball is the people's sport." It was a deep ballpark, with the left field wall 378 feet from home plate, center field 509 feet, and the right field corner 340 feet. And in a time when the height of pitchers' mounds were not standardized, its mound was 20 inches above the ground, the highest in the majors at the time. The overflowing opening day crowd watched as the Athletics christened the new ballpark with an 8-1 victory over the Boston Red Sox. They were led that season by future Hall of Famers Eddie Collins and Frank Home Run Baker in the infield, part of the $100,000 infield, and pitchers Chief Bender and Eddie Plank. They finished second that season, 3.5 games behind league champion Detroit Tigers, but it was an indicator of good times at Shibe Park. They won the pennant and the World Series in 1910, 1911, and 1913, and won the pennant in 1914, only to lose to the Miracle Boston Braves in 4 straight games. In recognition of the club's success, Shibe and Mack expanded their ballpark in 1913, adding bleacher seats in front of the left field wall, shortening the distance down the left field line from 378 feet to 334 feet, and to deep center from 509 feet to 471 feet. They also covered the existing seats down the outfield foul lines. In 1914, another challenge was raised against Major League Baseball. The Independent Federal League Circuit placed teams in 8 current or former Major League cities and began signing players away from the AL and NL. These raids cost the Athletics many of its stars who either jumped to the new league or were traded to other teams by Connie Mack, who refused to pay the higher salaries driven by the upstart league. Meanwhile, just 5 blocks away at what was now called Baker Bowl, after the team owner William Baker, the Phillies had assembled a stellar pitching staff led by Grover Cleveland Alexander and Depa Rixey, and with the slugging of Gavy Kravis, finally managed to bring a National League pennant to Philadelphia in 1915. Just 5 years earlier, ownership expanded the seating capacity of Baker Bowl to 20,000 fans by extending the upper deck further down the foul lines and building bleachers in left field. In the World Series, they met the Boston Red Sox, who featured future Hall of Famers Tris Speaker, Harry Hooper, Herb Pennock, and a young pitcher by the name of George Herman Babe Ruth. The series was notable for the fact it was the first time a U.S. president attended a World Series game, when Woodrow Wilson attended the second game played at Baker Bowl, which the Phillies lost 2-1. Also notable and a negative perspective was the way the Phillies lost the deciding fifth game. Owners added seats from center field to right center to sell additional tickets. As a result, Boston's Harry Hooper hit 2 home runs to center field that normally would have landed inside the fence, as did Duffy Lewis. While the Athletics, having divested their best players, sank to last place, the Phillies remained competitive for the next 2 years, finishing second twice. But by 1918, the team also began to slide, and for the next 10 years finished last or next to last. The Phillies' futility was compounded by another tragedy at the ballpark in 1927, when 2 sections of the lower deck extension along the right field line collapsed due to rotten timbers after fans tried to seek shelter from the rain. 50 people were injured due to the collapse, and 1 person died of a heart attack during the stampede to escape the area. Once again, the Phillies had to use the Athletics ballpark while theirs was repaired. The park's decay was not news. A January 1922 winter storm damaged the center field clubhouse at Broad and Lehigh and tore away part of the roof over the grandstand at 15th and Huntington. Philadelphia's building inspectors ordered extensive repairs after discovering many parts of the grandstand decayed. The Sporting News reported that there had been numerous complaints about the park, including spectators reporting that the stands would tremble on days when large crowds were in attendance, and rust falling down on their heads when foul balls struck the roof. Fortunately, or unfortunately for the Phillies, large crowds were sparse, with average game attendance generally 1/6 of the 18,000-seat capacity for the ballpark. But the Philadelphia area was not totally bereft of competitive baseball. The Hillsdale Giants of the Eastern Colored League won 3 consecutive pennants from 1923 through 1925 and the 1925 Colored World Series. Playing in suburban Darby, Pennsylvania at Hillsdale Park, the club featured future Hall of Famers Judy Johnson at third base and catchers Louis Santop and Biz Mackey. Five blocks from Baker Bowl, Connie Mack, sensing better times, extended Shibe Park's upper deck that had ended at first and third base, all of the way down the outfield lines, and replaced the park's unroofed bleachers in left field with double-deck covered bleachers, increasing the park's capacity to 33,500 fans. By this time, Mack had restocked his team, and the Athletics had a consistently winning ball club. From 1925 until 1928, they finished either second or third in a time when the New York Yankees owned the American League. And in 1929, the Athletics overtook the Yankees, beating them by 18 games. The team was well stocked with future Hall of Famers, including pitcher Lefty Grove, battery mate Mickey Cochran, first baseman Jimmy Fox, and outfielder Al Simmons. Together, they led the Athletics to 3 straight American League titles and 2 World Series championships. But as the Great Depression dragged on, Connie Mack was once again forced to unload his stars, and by 1935 they were once again in last place. It was at this time that Mack brought to an end the business of homeowners on 20th Street who were selling tickets to watch the games from their rooftops. While the Athletics were successful, ownership tolerated the homeowners' entrepreneurship. But after the sell-off of his best players, the unofficial seating cut into their already lean profit margin. So in 1935, they raised the low 12-foot fence in right field to 34 feet with a 22-foot high corrugated metal extension. Things were not much better for the Phillies, who had never recovered after their great years in 1915 through 1917, other than the 1934 season when they managed to claw their way above 500. They consistently finished last or next to last in all but 4 years during the time they had left in Baker Bowl. The only bright spot was the hitting of future Hall of Famer Chuck Klein, and he was traded prior to the start of the 1934 season to the Chicago Cubs. This led to a standing joke in Philadelphia which revolved around a large sign on the right field wall that read, "The Phillies use Lifebuoy," a popular soap at the time, and the fans would add, "and they still stink." The right field wall was so close to home plate, and so many balls were hit out of the park, often breaking windows on vehicles and buildings across the street from the park, that the club extended the outfield wall with a screen that made the total height 60 feet. But by the 1930s, the ballpark, the last of the 19th century ballparks, was close to its end, and midway through 1938, the team transferred all of its games to Shibe Park, where they would remain through 1971. It ended its life serving host to various sporting events, most notably midget auto racing. By 1950, when it was finally torn down, all that remained of the field was its outer walls and a weed-choked field. The Phillies' owner at the time, Gerald Nugent, cited the move to Shibe Park as an opportunity for the Phillies to cut expenses and share stadium upkeep with the rival Athletics. The change of venue would not provide any immediate relief to the suffering Philadelphia fans. Both teams continued to prove unable to win throughout most of the 1940s. The only notable achievement during this time was the addition of lights for night games in 1939. In West Philadelphia, there was a bandbox ballpark called alternately PRR, YMCA Athletic Field, Penmar Park, and 44th and Parkside Ballpark. It was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad YMCA. The field opened in 1903 and grandstands added in the 1920s. It was here that the Philadelphia Stars of the Negro National League played most of its games from 1936 through 1952. The field was adjacent to the railroad's main yard roundhouse. Stars catcher Stanley Glenn, who recalled how games would have to be halted due to the smoke and soot from the steam-powered engines covering the playing field. The field is now a community park called Philadelphia Stars Negro League Memorial Park. The park features an historical marker, a memorial statue of a ball player following through on his swing, and a mural across the street from the park created as part of the Philadelphia's Mural Arts program. Prior to occupying Penmar Park, they played 2 seasons at Passon Field at the corner of 48th and Spruce Street. They shared the field with the Eastern Colored League's Philadelphia Bacharach Giants. The site is now called Pollock Field and is used today by West Philadelphia High School's football and baseball teams. It was at Passon Field that the Stars won the 1934 Negro National League Championship, beating the Chicago American Giants 4-3 with 1 tie. Things started to look hopeful for the city's 2 major league teams after the end of World War II. The Athletics played respectable winning ball beginning in 1947 through 1949. And in 1950, the Phillies Whiz Kids won the team's second pennant. The club was led by the hitting of Richie Ashburn, 23, and Dell Ennis, 25, and the pitching of Robin Roberts, 23, and Curt Simmons, 21. That was the turning point for the two clubs in Philadelphia. Beginning in 1950, the Phillies consistently outdrew the Athletics at Shibe Park, as the American League team, after a glimmer of hope in the late 1940s, settled back to mediocrity. By 1955, the Phillies once again had the city of brotherly love and Shibe Park to themselves, as the Athletics left the city for greener pastures in Kansas City. The Phillies remained competitive for most of the 1950s, but could never recapture the magic of the 1950 season. And by 1958, they were once again cellar dwellers in the National League. Shibe Park, now known as Connie Mack Stadium, did see one more moment of excitement in 1964, when the Phillies seemed to be on the verge of once again winning a National League title. Then, one of the most memorable collapses occurred. The Phillies led the St. Louis Cardinals and the Cincinnati Reds by 6 games with only 12 to play, but they could not pull it out. They lost 10 of their last 12 games, finishing tied for second with the Reds. By then, the 55-year-old park suffered from problems most fields built prior to World War I confronted: lack of parking and a general deterioration of the surrounding neighborhood. After World War II, the middle class started to move out of the city and into the suburbs. No longer would fans travel to games in rail cars. They wanted to drive their family automobiles. The final game at Connie Mack Stadium was played on October 1st, 1970, when the Phillies beat the Montreal Expos 2-1 in 10 innings, closing out the 62-year history of the ballpark. Unfortunately, the almost 32,000 fans who attended the last game got out of control and rioted at the end of the game. The Philadelphia Inquirer wrote, "Fans ripped up their seats and ransacked the dugouts. They tore off railings and billboards. A gigantic old rain tarp was torn to shreds and both the infield and outfield were ruined." 1 year later, the old ballpark was gutted by fire on the same day that a statue of Connie Mack, that had stood across from the old ballpark since 1957, was rededicated in front of the Phillies' new home at Veterans Stadium. While at Shibe Park, the Phillies rarely drew more than 1 million fans, and by the late 1960s struggled to exceed 500,000. As early as 1959, Phillies owner Robert Carpenter Jr. was proposing a new ballpark to be built across the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. To keep the team in Philadelphia proper, the city in 1964 passed a bond issue to build a new multi-purpose stadium in South Philadelphia, close to existing John F. Kennedy Stadium. It took 7 years to see Veterans Stadium completed, but on April 10, 1971, the Phillies opened the park with a 4-1 victory over the Montreal Expos. A crowd of over 55,000 people filled the stadium that day. Like many of the multi-purpose stadiums built in the late 1960s and 1970s, the field was completely covered in synthetic turf except for sliding pits at the bases. Players complained of the hardness of the turf, saying that running on it caused back pain. Even in the new ballpark, the Phillies still struggled on the field. In 1972, the team won only 59 games, nearly half of them by Cy Young winner Steve Carlton, who won 27 games with a 1.97 ERA and 310 strikeouts. But there was a genesis of a great team forming. The infield featured a young shortstop named Larry Boa, and left field was patrolled by the Bull Greg Luzinski. In addition, Waiting their turns in the minor league were catchers Bob Boone and Hall of Fame third baseman Mike Schmidt. By 1976, fans visiting Veterans Stadium basked in Phillies' success as the team won the Eastern Division 3 straight years. And in 1980, nearly 100 years after the birth of the team, it finally delivered a World Series championship to its long beleaguered fans. During this time, the stadium's seating capacity was expanded from its original 56,371 seats for baseball to a maximum of 66,744 in 1985. By the time it closed in 2003, it had receded back to 61,831. After their first World Series championship in 1980, Veterans Stadium hosted 2 more World Series. In 1983, the Phillies lost in 5 games to the Baltimore Orioles. And in 1993, they fell to the Toronto Blue Jays in 6 games, ending with a Joe Carter walk-off home run. And of course, Veterans Stadium wouldn't be a Phillies ballpark if it didn't have tragedy attached to it. At the 1998 Army-Navy game, a railing collapsed, injuring 8 cadets. Despite being only little more than 30 years old, both the Phillies and their co-tenants, the NFL Eagles, were looking for new separate fields. Construction of a new ballpark for the Phillies began in 2001, and the 43,500-seat Citizens Bank Park opened on April 3, 2004, with the first regular season game being played on April 12th. The Phillies lost that game to the Cincinnati Reds 4-1. The ballpark is designed in the fashion of the trend-setting Oriole Park at Camden Yards, with asymmetrical outfield distances. The left field wall is 329 feet from home plate, 401 feet to straightaway center field, and 330 feet to the right field foul pole. The short distances to the left and right field foul poles led to more than 200 home runs being hit in the first 2 years. After the 2005 season, the left field wall was moved back 5 feet, but the park still had the reputation of being hitter-friendly. In 2008, the fans celebrated the Phillies' second World Series championship. The club returned to the World Series again in 2009, but were defeated again by the New York Yankees. The team continued to excel, winning the National League East Division 3 more times. Without a doubt, Citizens Bank Park is a worthy successor to Connie Mack Stadium, and it is a crown jewel among Major League ballparks today.